The grand synod of the Ethel Guardian conclave sat in a silence so profound, it seemed to possess a physical weight, pressing down upon the chitinous carapaces, the gelatinous membranes, and the ethereal energy fields of the gathered delegates with the suffocating pressure of a collapsing star. This was not the silence of peace, nor the meditative quiet of the scholar's sanctuary in the core worlds. It was the silence of the grave, the hushed breath of a galaxy waiting for the executioner's blade to fall. The high hall, a colossal structure carved from the hollowed-out geode of a moon that had died before its parent planet was born, shimmered with the bioluminescent anxiety of 1,000 species. Light refracted through the crystalline walls, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters of the civilizations that had already been extinguished. High Exarch Thaler, his 4 eyes clouded with the milky film of extreme age and stress, gripped the edges of his podium, his talons digging into the iridescent metal until it groaned in protest. He looked out over the assembly, seeing not unity, but a mosaic of terror. The Galactic Federation, the vaunted shield of order that had stood for eons, was fracturing under the strain of a fear that had no name, a darkness that had swept in from the intergalactic void like a tide of ink, erasing systems not with the chaotic fire of war, but with a cold, methodical silence. They called it the hush. It did not negotiate. It did not posture. It simply arrived, and where it passed, stars dimmed and communications ceased, leaving behind only the static of the dead. Thaler cleared his throat, a sound like grinding stones that echoed through the vast chamber, amplified by the acoustic architecture designed to make even a whisper sound like the decree of a god. He knew what he had to propose, and the thought tasted like ash in his mouth. The logic of the Federation was absolute. The survival of the many outweighed the survival of the few. It was a calculus of sacrifice that had kept the core world safe for millennia, but the variables had changed. The hush was consuming the outer rim faster than their fleets could retreat, faster than their refugees could flee. The strategy of containment had failed. Now they were discussing the unthinkable, the abandonment of the entire Perseus arm, a sacrifice of unimaginable scale to create a buffer zone of dead space, hoping the hush would starve before it reached the inner sanctum of the galaxy. "The simulations are complete," Thaler announced, his voice trembling with a rare tremor of emotion. "The probability of core survival increases significantly if we sever the warp lanes to the outer sectors immediately. We must cauterize the wound to save the body. The evacuation fleets, they cannot all be saved. To attempt to defend them is to invite the hush into the hyperlanes, leading it directly to us. We must close the gates." A murmur of horror rippled through the chamber, a cacophony of clicks, hums, and psychic screams. To close the gates was to sentence countless billions to isolation and inevitable consumption. It was a moral event horizon from which there could be no return. Among the agitated delegates, near the rear of the chamber in a section reserved for probationary species and minor protectorates, the Terran delegation sat with a stillness that was almost unnatural. They were small compared to the towering crustaceans of the Krell, fragile compared to the crystalline bodies of the Lithos, and painfully short-lived compared to the immortal energy weavers of the Zil. Yet they did not fidget. They did not emit pheromones of distress. Ambassador Elias Thorne sat with his hands clasped on the table before him, his gaze fixed on the High Exarch with an intensity that unnerved the telepathic sensors of the assembly. The humans were an enigma, a young species that had stumbled onto the galactic stage only a few cycles ago, seemingly by accident. They were primitive in their warp technology, reliant on kinetic weaponry that the elder races viewed as barbarically inefficient, and possessed of a chaotic, fractured history that suggested they would destroy themselves long before they became a threat to anyone else. They were tolerated, patronized, and largely ignored. They were the children of the galaxy, allowed to sit at the table but expected to remain silent while the adults discussed the fate of the universe. But as the debate raged, as the Krell warlords roared for immediate blockade and the pacifist Zil wept for the souls they were about to abandon, the atmosphere around the human table shifted. It was a subtle change, a drop in temperature, a hardening of the air. Thaler continued, his voice gaining the strident pitch of desperation. "We have no other choice. The fleets of the hegemony were broken at the Nebular Pass. The armada of the Cygnus Alliance vanished in a standard day. The hush adapts to our energy signatures. It feeds on our shield harmonics. Every shot we fire only makes it stronger. Our only weapon is distance. We must retreat. We must hide." The defeatism was palpable, a contagion spreading from mind to mind. The ancient races, masters of matter and energy, builders of Dyson spheres and sculptors of nebulae, were reduced to prey animals, cowering in their burrows. It was in this moment of absolute despair that the sound of a single chair scraping against the floor cut through the panic. It was a harsh, mechanical sound, utterly mundane yet shockingly loud in the sudden silence it provoked. Ambassador Thorne stood up. He smoothed the lapels of his dark, synthetic suit, a garment of stark simplicity amidst the flowing robes and bio-armor of the others. He did not activate his translator immediately. He simply looked around the room, making eye contact with the representatives of species that could crush his homeworld with a thought. Then he tapped his microphone. "The Exarch suggests that survival requires the sacrifice of the innocent," Thorne said, his voice calm, flat, and devoid of the hysterical pitch that had dominated the session. "He suggests that we trade space for time and lives for comfort. This is the logic of a survivor. It is logical, it is calculated, it is efficient." He paused, and for a moment the assembly thought the humans were agreeing, bowing to the wisdom of their betters. "But it is also cowardice," Thorne finished, the word landing like a kinetic strike. A roar of outrage erupted. The Varkelian representative, a massive reptilian creature wreathed in holographic displays, slammed a fist onto its console. "You dare!" the Varkelian hissed, the translator struggling to convey the depth of its contempt. "You, a species that has barely mastered the atom, dare to lecture the architects of the Veil on cowardice. You have not seen the hush. You have not watched entire star systems blink out of existence. You are children playing with fire, and now you insult the firefighters who are trying to save the house." Thaler raised a hand to silence the room, his many eyes narrowing at the human. "Ambassador Thorne," he said icily, "your species is under the protection of this council. You are here by our grace. Do not mistake our patience for weakness. We are discussing the survival of civilization. If you have nothing constructive to add, I suggest you return to your seat and pray that the barrier we build is strong enough to save your little blue marble along with the rest of us." Thorne did not sit. He did not flinch. He walked slowly away from his table, moving into the center of the amphitheater, a solitary figure on the polished floor of obsidian. "Protection," Thorne mused, his voice amplified now, reaching the furthest tiers. "You speak of protection while plotting to abandon a third of the galaxy to death. You speak of civilization while discarding the very ethics that define it. You are afraid. We understand fear. Humanity was born in fear. We evolved on a death world, hunted by predators faster, stronger, and more natural than us. We spent our infancy in the dark, listening to the monsters scratch at the cave entrance." He stopped in the center of the room, looking up at the High Exarch. "But we learned something in the dark that you seem to have forgotten in the light. We learned that you do not negotiate with the monster. You do not feed it your arm in the hope that it will not eat your heart. You pick up a rock, you pick up a stick, and you beat it until it stops moving, or until you do. There is no middle ground." The arrogance of the statement was breathtaking. The sheer, unadulterated hubris of this primitive mammal lecturing the elders of the galaxy stunned the room into silence once more. "And what," Thaler asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "does the Human Federation propose? Shall you throw rocks at the hush? Shall you poke the entity that eats stars with a stick? Our weapons, antimatter lances, singularity projectors, psionic storms have failed. What do you have that we do not?" Thorne's expression hardened, the mask of diplomatic neutrality slipping to reveal something cold and iron-hard beneath. "We have the will to stand," he said. "And we have been busy. You see us as children. You look at our ships and see blocks of titanium and primitive fusion drives. You look at our history and see chaos. But you didn't look close enough. You didn't ask why we never unified under one banner until we reached the stars. You didn't ask why our weapons are kinetic, why we favor armor over shields, why we build our ships like anvils rather than art." Thorne turned to the holographic projector in the center of the room. "Computer, override authorization Thorne Alpha 0, display tactical overlay, Sector 4, the Promethean line." The computer chirped, a sound that shouldn't have been possible as the system was bio-coded to the council elders. Thaler gasped as the central display shifted. "Ted, the map of the galaxy changed. The red zones where the hush was advancing were suddenly overlaid with a new color, gold. A solid, jagged line of gold stretching across the parsecs, intersecting the hush's path. While you were debating the mathematics of surrender," Thorne said, his voice rising, resonating with a sudden, commanding power, "humanity deployed. We did not ask for permission because we knew you would hesitate. We did not ask for support because we knew you would hoard it. We moved the entirety of the Terran Sol fleet to the bottleneck at the Antares Rift." A collective gasp went through the hall. The Antares Rift was a graveyard, a region of unstable space where sensors were blind and shields were useless. It was the only corridor the Hush could take to reach the inner core quickly. "You sent your fleet to die," the Zill representative whispered, their energy field dimming in sorrow. "You sacrificed your people to buy us. What? Minutes." "Oh," Thorn said. "We did not go there to die, we went there to hunt." He gestured to the screen. "You say the Hush adapts to energy, it eats shields, it absorbs lasers, so we didn't bring any. The Sol fleet is composed of 20,000 capital ships armed with hypervelocity railguns, mass drivers, and nuclear-pumped kinetic penetrators. We are not feeding it energy. We are feeding it mass. Billions of tons of tungsten and depleted uranium, accelerated to a fraction of light speed. Crude, ugly, and effective. As if on cue, the display flickered, showing a live feed from the Antares Rift. The image was grainy, distorted by the immense gravitational anomalies of the region, but what it showed was undeniable. The Hush, an amorphous cloud of darkness that blotted out the stars, was churning, and it was breaking. Flashes of brilliant white light punctuated the darkness, not the clean beams of directed energy, but the violent, messy explosions of kinetic impact. The human ships, massive, boxy, unlovely things, were forming a wall. They were not maneuvering with the grace of the elven fleets. They were sitting there, taking the hits, their armor plating glowing red, ablating away under the assault, while they poured a ceaseless stream of metal into the void. "They are holding," Thaler whispered, his mind unable to reconcile the data. "The Hush is slowing down, its forward momentum is being arrested by pure kinetic force." Thorn nodded. "It is a creature of energy absorption. It expects resistance to be light, to be heat, to be plasma. It does not understand being hit in the face with a planet's worth of iron. It is confused, and because it is confused, it is vulnerable." The hall was in uproar now, but the tone had shifted from fear to disbelief, and then to a dawning, terrifying hope. But Thorn was not finished. "This is not just a holding action," he announced, his voice cutting through the noise. "We did not come here to brag. We came here to tell you that the era of fear is over. You have lived for thousands of years in the shadow of the unknown, terrified of what lies in the dark. You built walls, you built buffers, you hid." He looked at the cameras, addressing not just the delegates, but the trillions watching across the galaxy. "Humanity decided enough was enough. We do not hide from the dark, we light a fire. And if the fire isn't enough, we burn the whole forest down." "High Exarch," Thorn said, turning back to the stunned leader. "The Sol fleet is preparing to initiate the second phase of the operation. We call it the hammer, but we need the anvil. The Hush is pinned against the gravitational shear of the rift. It is trapped. If the Federation fleets, your useless energy weapons, fire now not at the Hush, but at the rift boundaries, you can collapse the gravity well. You can crush it." Thaler stared at the human. The plan was madness. It required a coordination of fire that had never been attempted, between species that barely spoke to each other, using a strategy that defied every doctrine of naval warfare. And it required trusting the humans to hold the line while the very fabric of space collapsed around them. "If we collapse the rift," Thaler said slowly, "your fleet, they will be inside the event horizon. They will be crushed along with the Hush." Thorn's face did not change. "We know." The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of awe. The concept of sacrifice was known to the aliens, but it was transactional. You sacrificed a pawn to save a king. You sacrificed a colony to save a world. This was different. This was the sacrifice of the self for the abstract concept of victory. It was illogical. It was terrifying. It was human. "Why?" the Zill representative asked, their voice trembling. "Why would you do this for us? We treated you as children. We ignored you." Thorn looked at the Zill, and for the first time his expression softened. "Because someone had to, because if we don't stop it here, there is no later F. Or anyone, and because," he straightened his tie, "we are the children, and one day the children have to protect the parents even if the parents are old and afraid." He tapped his comms earpiece. "Admiral Vance, this is Thorn. The Council is considering the proposal." A voice crackled over the speakers, rough, distorted by interference and the roar of battle. "Tell them to hurry up, Elias. The paint is starting to scratch on the Indomitable, and I'm running out of ammo. If they don't fire in 10 mics, we're going to have to ram this bastard, and I just had the hull waxed." The casual bravery, the gallows humor in the face of annihilation, struck the alien assembly with the force of a physical blow. Thaler felt a sensation he hadn't felt in centuries. Shame, and then pride. He slammed his hand down on the activation rune for the Grand Fleet. "All units," he roared, his voice breaking with the intensity of the command. "This is High Exarch Thaler. Coordinate targeting data with the Terran command. Vector all main batteries to the rift periphery. Do not fire on the enemy. Fire on the coordinates provided by the humans. Repeat, fire on the human mark." The galaxy held its breath. Across thousands of systems, ships that had been preparing to flee turned around. Engines flared, charging to maximum output. Weapons that had been powered down hummed to life. The sky above the high hall filled with the holographic representation of the galaxy's might, finally united not by a treaty but by the example of the smallest among them. "Admiral," Thorne said into the comms, "the anvil is ready." "Copy that, Ambassador," came the reply. "Sol Fleet, brace for impact. All hands, it's been an honor. Let's show them how we do it in the Sol system. Fire for effect." The screen turned white. The sensors in the hall overloaded, blinded by the energy release of 1,000,000 capital ships firing in unison, combined with the gravitational collapse of a region of space 3 light-years across. The floor of the chamber shook, a tremor that traveled through subspace, felt by every sentient being in the sector. Then, the silence returned. But this time the static on the screen was different. It cleared slowly, revealing the aftermath. The Antares rift was gone. In its place was a stable, cooling nebula of dust and gas. The hush, the unstoppable, all-consuming darkness was gone, crushed into subatomic particles. And in the center of the cloud, floating amidst the debris, were the wrecks of the human ships, twisted, broken, venting atmosphere, but many, still there. Beacons began to blink, distress signals, life signs. "They survived," Thaler whispered, unable to believe his instruments. "Impossible, the gravity shear alone." "Human engineering," Thorne said, though his own hands were shaking now. "We overbuild everything, just in case." He slumped slightly, the adrenaline fading, leaving him exhausted. "We expect rescue teams, Exarch. We expect full medical support, and we expect that seat on the council to be permanent." Thaler looked at the human, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the fatigue, the sorrow, but also the unbreakable resolve. He looked around the hall. The other delegates were standing. The Krell, the Zil, the Lithos, species that never agreed on anything, were standing in a gesture of universal respect. "Ambassador," Thaler said, bowing his head low, a gesture reserved for emperors and gods. "The seat is yours. The rescue fleets are already jumping. Today the galaxy does not fear. Today the galaxy gives thanks." But the story did not end there. As the rescue fleets sifted through the wreckage, pulling survivors from the twisted hulls of the Terran ships, they found something else. The flagship, the Indomitable, had not just been holding the line. It had been recording. The sensor logs from the heart of the battle, from the moment before the hush was crushed, were recovered. And when the council analyzed them, the celebration turned into a chill that was different from the fear of the hush. It was a chill of realization. The data showed that the hush was not a natural phenomenon. It was not a mindless predator. It was a construct. And deeper in the logs, masked by the noise of the battle, was a signal. A transmission that the humans had intercepted and decoded in the final moments. It was directed at the hush. It was a recall signal. The hush hadn't just been destroyed. It had been trying to flee. It had been running from something else. The transmission came from outside the galactic plane, from the dark void between galaxies. The council reconvened, the mood somber, the jubilation of victory tempered by this new mystery. Thorne stood at the center again, but this time he was not the petitioner. He was the leader. Beside him stood Admiral Vance, her arm in a sling, her face scarred, looking every bit the warrior that the aliens had fantasized about in their myths. "You saw the data," Vance saw. Her voice raspy. "The hush was a biological weapon, a scouring agent. Someone sent it here to clean the Petri dish." "Who?" asked the Varkelian, its aggression replaced by a nervous twitch. "We don't know," Thorne answered. "But we know they are watching, and we know that the hush was just the first wave, the signal we intercepted. It wasn't just a recall, it was a status report." He keyed the console, playing the audio. A series of discordant mechanical screeches filled the air, translated by the computer into a chillingly flat monotone. Target resistance exceeds parameters. Species designation, Terran, anomalous aggression, re-evaluating sterilization protocol, escalation authorized. The silence that followed was heavy. The galaxy had just survived an apocalypse, only to find out it was merely a test. "Escalation," Thaler breathed. "If the hush was the test, what is the real weapon?" Thorne looked at the Admiral, and they shared a look that communicated a secret history, a truth that humanity had kept hidden even from itself until now. "We have a theory," Thorne said carefully. "Our archaeologists, on Mars, on Earth, on the moons of Jupiter, we found ruins. Ancient ones, older than the Prothean ruins, older than the Ethelgard. We thought they were just precursors, but the technology, it matches the signature of the weapon that killed the hush." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "We didn't just stumble onto the galactic stage," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a whisper. We think we were left behind. We think we are the immune system." The realization rippled through the alien minds. The humans, so chaotic, so violent, so incredibly resilient, were not an accident of evolution. They were designed, or at least they were the descendants of something that was designed to fight this specific enemy. The signal originated from the Andromeda Galaxy, Vance said, pulling up a new star map. It's a long way off, but they are coming, or we can go to them. The council stared at the humans. The idea of an intergalactic war was beyond their comprehension. They were galaxy-bound, comfortable in their little island of stars. Go to them? Thaler asked. That is impossible. The void is too vast. Not for us, Thorne said. We captured the Hush's drive core. It uses a form of travel we hadn't considered, dimensional folding. We can build it. We can retrofit the Sol fleet and the Federation fleet. He looked around the room. The Hush came here because it thought we were weak. It thought the galaxy was ready for harvest. We proved it wrong. But if we wait, they will send something we can't stop, so we don't wait. Thorne leaned forward, his hands resting on the podium, his eyes burning with a fire that seemed to light up the dark chamber. The galaxy lived in fear for too long. You spent eons looking over your shoulder. Humanity decided enough was enough. We stopped the Hush. Now we are going to stop the ones who sent it. We are asking you to join us, not as protectors and charges, but as allies, as brothers in arms. We provide the rage. You provide the wisdom. We provide the hammer. You provide the guidance. Together, we don't just survive. We conquer the dark. The choice was stark. Stay in the cradle and wait for the wolf to return, or step out of the house and hunt the wolf in its den. Thaler looked at the faces of his peers. He saw fear, yes, but he also saw something new. He saw the reflection of the human spirit. He saw the desire to stand. Ethelgardian Conclave, Thaler said, his voice strong, pledges its fleets to the Terran Initiative. The Krell Empire pledges its legions, roared the crustacean warlord. The Zil pledge their light, whispered the energy beings. One by one, the races of the galaxy stood. They were no longer a fractured assembly of terrified bureaucrats. They were a war council. And at the head of the table, the small, fragile humans stood tall, the unexpected guardians of a galaxy that had underestimated them. Thorne nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Good, he said. Then let's get to work. We have a galaxy to invade. The transition from defense to offense was not easy. It required the total mobilization of the galactic economy. The peaceful shipyards of the Zil began to churn out hulls reinforced with Krell armor and fitted with human railguns. The scientific academies of the Lithos worked side by side with Terran engineers to reverse engineer the dimensional drive. The culture clash was immense. Aliens who viewed war as a failure of diplomacy had to learn the human philosophy that war was sometimes the only way to ensure diplomacy could exist. But the humans learned too. They learned patience from the Ethelgard. They learned precision from the Lithos. They learned that not every problem was a nail, even if they were the hammer. The integration of the fleets created a force unlike anything the universe had ever seen. It was a chimera of technology and philosophy, a blend of the ancient and the new, the elegant and the brutal. Months turned into years. The tension was constant. Every shadow on the sensors was a potential invasion fleet. But the attack never came. The enemy was waiting, or perhaps they were arrogant, assuming their test had simply been delayed. This gave the Alliance time to build, time to train, and time for the humans to dig deeper into their own past. The ruins on Mars yielded more secrets. They found a message buried deep in the databanks of an ancient outpost beneath the polar ice. It was a warning left by the progenitors. We failed to stop them. We are retreating to the sanctuary. If you find this, you are the last line of defense. Do not trust the silence. The message confirmed their worst fears and their highest hopes. They were the inheritors of a war that had spanned eons. The sanctuary was Earth. The silence was the enemy. Finally, the day came. The dimensional drive was ready. The Grand Fleet, now a swarm of millions of vessels representing 1,000 species, gathered at the edge of the galaxy. The humans took the lead, their new flagship, the Terra Nova, a behemoth of war that dwarfed the old Indomitable, positioning itself at the vanguard. Thorne, now High Chancellor of the Alliance, stood on the bridge. He looked at the viewscreen, at the vast emptiness between the Milky Way and Andromeda. It was an abyss that no living being had ever crossed. Fleet status, he asked. Green across the board, Admiral Vance replied, her scars now a badge of honor among the fleet. All ships reported ready. The Ethelgard are nervous, but they're holding formation. And the weapon? Thorne asked. The Nova cannons are primed, Vance said. If there's a welcome party, we're ready to shake hands. Initiate the jump, Thorne commanded. The space in front of the fleet didn't just tear, it folded. A tunnel of swirling light defying the laws of physics opened up. The fleet surged forward, leaving the safety of home behind. The journey was instantaneous and eternal, a moment of disorientation where time lost its meaning. And then they were there, Andromeda. But it was not like their galaxy. The stars were dimmer. There was a haze over the spiral arms, and the sensors immediately screamed. Contacts, the tactical officer shouted. Thousands, No, millions, they were waiting. The screen filled with red icons. The enemy fleet was a wall of biomechanical horrors, ships that looked like flayed muscle and bone, pulsed with dark energy. They swarmed out of the void, a pestilence made manifest. They expected us to cower, Thorne said, his voice calm amidst the rising panic on the bridge. They expected a single ship or a diplomatic envoy. They didn't expect the neighborhood to show up. He turned to the comms. All ships, formation Aegis, release the drone swarms, charge main batteries, target the largest signatures, fire at will. The battle for Andromeda began not with a whimper, but with the roar of a united galaxy. The human railguns, now enhanced with alien gravity tech, punched holes through the enemy bioships. The Krell plasma lances cauterized the wounds. The Zil Sconaquivers disrupted the enemy hive mind. It was a slaughter, but it was a slaughter of the enemy. The Alliance fought with a ferocity that caught the ancient aggressors off guard. They had fought isolated civilizations, terrified species that ran and hid. They had never fought a united front. They had never fought humans. As the battle raged, the Terra Nova pushed toward the center of the enemy formation, toward a massive structure that pulsed with the same dark energy as the Hush. It was the command node. "That's the brain," Vance said. "If we kill that, the drone ships might deactivate." "It's shielded," the tactical officer reported. "Readings indicate a dimensional barrier, nothing we can penetrate it." Thorne looked at the data. The barrier was shifting, adapting to incoming fire. It was the same tech as the Hush, but stronger. "It adapts to energy," Thorne muttered, "and it adapts to kinetic." He thought back to the council chamber, to the debate, to the nature of humanity. "We adapt too." "Admiral," Thorne said, "prepare the FTL drive." "Sir." Vance looked at him. "We're in the middle of a battle. You want to jump?" "Not away," Thorne said. "Into. The barrier operates on dimensional frequencies. If we generate a warp field that matches its opposing resonance, we can cancel it out. But we have to be close, point blank." "That's suicide," Vance said, though her hands were already moving over the controls. "It's a calculated risk," Thorne corrected. "And it's what we do." The Terra Nova broke formation, its engines flaring blue-white. It dove into the heart of the enemy swarm, taking fire from all sides. Shields buckled, armor shredded, decks vented atmosphere, but the ship kept going, a burning spear thrown at the heart of it. "Odd resonance matching," the computer intoned. 80%, 90. The command node loomed large, a moon-sized horror of twitching flesh and metal. "Mark," Vance shouted. "Engage drive." The Terra Nova didn't jump. It shuddered, releasing a wave of distortion that washed over the node. The dimensional barrier flickered, destabilized by the conflicting physics, and shattered. "Barrier down," Thorne yelled. "All fleets focus fire on the node, give them everything." The entire Alliance fleet, seeing the opening, poured their wrath into the gap. A million beams of light, a billion tons of metal, converged on a single point. The command node didn't just explode, it ceased to exist. It was erased from the universe. A psychic scream echoed across the system, felt by every living mind as the hive mind of the enemy shattered. The bioships went limp, drifting aimlessly in the void. The battle was over. The silence that followed was different this time. It was the silence of victory. But as the crew of the Terra Nova cheered, as the reports of surrender and confusion came in from the enemy remnants, Thorne stared at the wreckage of the node. Something was blinking amidst the debris. A beacon, but not one of theirs, and not one of the enemy's. "Tractor beam," Thorne ordered. "Bring it in." The object was brought to the hangar. It was a metallic monolith, perfectly smooth, untouched by the battle. As the science team approached it, it activated. A hologram projected into the air. It was a human, but not a modern human. He wore armor that looked like it was grown, not built. His eyes were glowing with golden light. "If you are seeing this," the figure spoke in a dialect of Proto-Indo-European that the translator struggled to parse, "then the cycle is broken. We are the first. We built the Hush to keep the others out and to keep you in until you were ready. We feared you would not be strong enough. We feared the galaxy was too soft." The figure smiled, a look of infinite sadness and pride. "We were wrong. You have surpassed us. The nursery is open. The universe is yours, but be warned. The ones we ran from. They are not the ones you just fought. The ones you fought were the jailers. Now you must face the judges." The hologram faded. Thorne looked at Vance. The bridge was silent. They had thought they won the war. They had thought they defeated the great evil. But they had just broken out of their crib. The enemy they fought was just the automated system designed to keep them safe until they were strong enough to survive what lay beyond. The realization was terrifying. But as Thorne looked out at the stars of Andromeda, strange and new, he didn't feel fear. He felt the old, familiar stirrings of human defiance. "The judges," Thorne tested the word. "Sounds like they have high standards." Vance chuckled, clutching her injured arm. "Well, we have a history of disappointing authority figures." Thorn turned to the comms, addressing the gathered fleets of the Galactic Alliance, the species that had once lived in fear and now stood as conquerors of a new galaxy. "Friends," Thorn said, his voice steady. "It seems our work is not done. We have passed the test. Now we go to meet the teachers, and if they want to judge us." He paused, watching the endless fleet reform, ready for the next command. "Let them come. We're just getting started." The camera pulled back, away from the bridge, away from the fleet, zooming out to show the two galaxies, the Milky Way and Andromeda, seemingly touching, connected by a bridge of ships. And in the darkness beyond, countless other galaxies spiraled, vast and unknown. But in the center of the frame, a tiny blue-white spark burned brighter than the rest. The spark of a species that decided enough was enough, and in doing so lit up the universe. The end was not an end, but a beginning. A beginning written in the stars, not with ink, but with the courage of those who refused to be afraid of the dark. The Galactic lived in fear until humanity decided enough was enough. And now the galaxy feared nothing at all.